Oh, the Asian American community? Why bother with them? They don't vote. If that statement surprised or shocked you in any way, it honestly shouldn't. Because it's true. Asian Americans today make up the fastest growing minority population in the United States. And yet, on average, every election, only 47% of us turn out and vote at the polls. This is a big deal considering the fact that by the year 2044, Asian Americans are expected to make up 10% of America's total voting population. But we can jump to conclusions quickly and say Asian Americans don't vote because they're politically disengaged. We can jump and join the narrative that political campaigns have used for the last few decades and termed us as politically inactive and disinterested. But we must ask, why don't Asian Americans vote? And there's two reasons why. Firstly, it's that political campaigns don't make an effort to reach out to Asian Americans. According to a study done by the Center for Asian American and Pacific Islander Justice after the 2016 elections, only 31% of Asian Americans report having been contacted by a political campaign in the last 4 years. That's a shocking number compared to the national average of 57% of the people that report having been contacted by a campaign. So it's not that Asian Americans don't vote because they're not interested or because they don't care about politics, but it's because they believe that they don't belong in American politics, that there's no place for them because they aren't being represented by their candidates and they aren't being reached out to. Secondly, even when Asian Americans do turn out to vote, they're often turned away at the polls due to strict voter ID laws. Specifically in states such as Texas, Georgia, and Mississippi, where voter ID laws are strict and are only going to get stricter. If there's anything Georgia's runoff from 2 days ago goes to prove, that the election of Brad Raffensperger is only going to lead to more strict voter ID laws. And in Texas, well, in 2011, Texas passed Senate Bill 14, which has often been criticized as the strictest voter ID law to be passed in this country. Because of that law, thousands of Asian Americans are turned away at the polls every single election season because they're told and misinformed of things such as you need to speak English in order to be able to vote. And they're often interrogated rigorously about their citizenship status. But this isn't true because according to Section 203 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, every single candidate has the right to be provided a ballot in their own language. So if I were to ask someone in the audience, what's the language that you speak? Besides English? Vietnamese, perfect. Can I get one from here? Any other language?
Italian.
Italian? Perfect. So according to Section 203 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, states are obligated to provide you a ballot in Vietnamese or Italian because that's the federal law. But in states such as Texas, that law isn't enforced because there's no form of federal oversight. But in 2018, the United States Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in BZ v. Abbott that Texas's Senate Bill 14 was too strict and needed to be repealed. But it's still pending further litigation. It still exists. Which means even today, these strict voter ID laws still prevent Asian Americans from voting. So how do we remedy this solution? Because as a hopeful American citizen someday, and as someone that would like to identify as an Asian American, I'm not going to stand by and let my fellow Asian Americans not vote when we can make a difference, when we can have our voices heard. So I suggest 3 ways to increase the Asian American vote. Let me walk you through them. Firstly, we need to increase the number of Asian American candidates that run for office. This may not sound like a big deal to you, but it really makes a difference. Because when you think about it, when you have a candidate that's running for office that doesn't just sound like a normal politician, but someone that can relate to you on a personal level and you know is going to fight for your representation in Congress, you form connection with them. That strengthens your cultural identity and that encourages you to go out and vote for them. If empirics only go to prove this, for example, look to Texas's 22nd congressional district, which includes Fort Bend, Brazoria, and Pearland. Sri Preston Kulkarni ran to become the first Asian American to represent Texas in the United States Congress. The biggest volunteer group for Sri's campaign weren't political science students. Okay. The biggest volunteer group for Sri wasn't a group of political science students or big shot law school graduates. No, they were uncles and aunties from our communities that shared our common values and that for the first time went out and voted and volunteered because they felt that their needs would be represented in Congress. That makes a difference, folks. So we must increase the number of Asian American candidates that run for office. Secondly, we should increase our outreach efforts specifically targeted towards the Asian American community. Once again, look to Sri Preston Kulkarni's campaign. As an intern on the campaign, I was proud to say that we were the first campaign in the United States to host a multilingual phone bank. A phone bank that spoke 13 different languages to reach out to as many voters as possible, and that ran for the last month of the election season this year. Some of the languages spoken in this phone bank were Hindi, Gujarati, Mandarin, Igbo. Basically, we were reaching out to as many voters as possible to get the word out. Because when you talk to someone in a language that they understand better, not only are you telling them what issues matter to them and why they should go out and vote for a candidate, but you form a personal connection with them. And that makes a difference. Asian Americans made history with KP George winning county judge, something that hasn't been done by an Asian American, and Julie Matthew, who won a judge seat. But this is what happens when most of us do turn out to vote. What could happen if all of us did turn out to vote? Let's turn our eyes to the future first. Because in 2020, for the first time, we have 2 Asian American candidates that have already declared their candidacy for president. We have Kamala Harris, who's a junior senator from California right now, who's running to be the first Asian American and first female president. And we have Andrew Yang, who's running to be the first Asian American president of the United States. If we do get out there, get the word out so that we can get the vote out and we can make their vote count, if only we could bring 75% of our community to get out there and vote on election day or during early voting when it matters, it makes a difference. So folks, get out there, make a difference. It really counts.